How to use critical thinking in our day-to-day decision-making. In the previous video, we reflected on the nature of critical thinking and René Descartes' take on it. In this video, we'll discuss a method inspired by Descartes' Cartesian method of doubt. It is an intuitive contemporary method that we can implement right away. In the next few minutes, we'll explore a 5-step approach that, when consistently applied, will help us analyze each situation more critically and objectively. Every day presents us with opportunities to exercise sound judgment. In some cases, we have the luxury of time to respond, while in others, we experience the stress of the ticking clock racing against us. In all cases, it will only benefit us if we employ a systematic method of response. Now, let's discuss step by step how to form our response to a situation. Step 1. Assess your own emotional reaction to the situation. Let's step back and examine how we feel about this situation. We know that if we feel excited or greedy, we'll usually focus on the confirming facts, overestimate benefits, and overlook the drawbacks. If we feel angry, we often get consumed by the negatives. If we feel sympathetic, we often rush to be agreeable and offer words of support without considering all facts. If we feel fearful, we usually overestimate the risks and downplay the benefits. If we feel impatient or uncomfortable, we may jump to hasty conclusions without considering all the facts. If we feel hurt, we close ourselves in a defense and react overly skeptical to any argument. It is important to understand our starting emotional point because we can better identify our own biases and raise our self-awareness before taking in further information. Furthermore, as we evaluate our emotions, we gain clarity by practicing self-honesty and self-care, allowing our rational side to take control. Step 2. Evaluate the interests and needs of the counterparty we're dealing with. Now let's put our best effort to understand the other side so we can identify their biases and be more competent at accommodating or responding to their needs if we so desire. It is hard to set aside your own emotions and try to understand what the other party really wants. In some cases, when the situation arose in some corporate setting or the other person represents a business or institution, it is predictable what they try to achieve. The business either needs your talent and cooperation in certain business matters, or they want to sell you an idea or a product. These interactions are not too personal, which makes it easier to understand the other side's interests. The challenge comes when we are influenced by certain emotions or feelings in a very personal interaction, especially if the other side does not communicate their interest clearly and honestly. Our judgment can get even more cloudy if they use various methods to trigger emotional response from us rather than a rational one. It is helpful to develop awareness of the methods used by various counterparties to gain our cooperation and acceptance. Nuanced words such as adjectives and verbs have strong emotional charge. Stating opinions and suggestions that amplify our emotions are good indicators that we need to proceed with caution. If we find ourselves being pressed into action, it is better to step back and rethink their interests as well as our own. Step 3. Evaluate our needs, interests, and values. After we've gained situational awareness, we need to take an introspective look and be honest with ourselves about our own needs and interests. This is especially important if some of our needs are contradictory to those of the counterparty. We need to employ criteria to evaluate our own needs and whether to prioritize or set them aside. One suitable way is to start from the vision of our ideal of ourselves. For instance, one aspect of my personal ideal involves an individual who attributes little value to material possessions, but engages in exclusive experiences that challenge my understanding of the world. So, every financial decision I make forces me to put the possibility of the purchase in this perspective. When evaluating your needs, consider whether fulfilling those needs brings you closer to your personal ideal. Step 4. Sort out the facts and opinions. We should evaluate the presented information, determining which facts we can trust and which should be verified through a different source, ideally an unbiased one. Some facts are easy to identify: dates, amounts, actual documents, chronology of events. Other facts are more difficult to confirm because they involve assessing human character, abilities, and capacity. For instance, if someone says they've put their best effort in a certain activity, you need to evaluate the following. 1. Their abilities. What is our opinion on their abilities, and how do we think their abilities measure against the challenge of the activity? 2. Their self-assessment. What is their own standard for delivery? 3. Their expectations. What outcome they've embraced when they've engaged in that activity? 4. Our opinion on their self-assessment. Do we think they delivered in accordance with their own standard? For example, consider a 6-year-old telling his parents that he's put his best effort into organizing his room. However, there are a few toys still lying on the floor. Two possible responses for the parents are to suggest that he put forth his best effort but needs to work on his ability to notice details, or that he has lower expectations or motivation to tidy up his room. The parents likely have already formed an opinion on the child's abilities since they've organized the room together many times and explained the desired location of each toy, defining the expected result. Further, imagine that in the past the child had presented a very well-organized room, which evidenced that he has high self-assessment and knows the expectations. In this case, the parents would conclude that this time he did not put forth his best effort. So, the parents need to consider the child's abilities, expectations, and self-assessment to determine whether the best effort is reflected in the result. When interacting with your child, judgments like this may take only seconds. However, when evaluating someone's effort in a work environment, such judgments may require more thorough assessment and could lead to disputes involving HR. So, it is even more important to have a clear understanding of the facts and opinions to support your decisions. People's expectations are also difficult to examine. We can misinterpret expectations because, 1. We tend to attribute to others the same expectations that we have. 2. Expectations involve an outlook of the future that can change any time. 3. We assume we have influence over their process of setting expectations, which may be misleading. For instance, you and your partner are invited to a party that starts tonight at 7 p.m. You assume that your partner shares your expectation to arrive at 7 p.m. at the venue. Even if that's the case, something might have happened in the meantime, such as an urgent email or an unexpected call from an old friend. So, you've missed that his or her expectation changed as the urgent email or call gets prioritized. After all, it's just a party, right? You think if you rush your partner, you can still leave on time, but their expectation has already changed to 7:30 p.m., and your influence is fading the more you insist. So, if there's anything comforting in this situation, it must be the shared expectation of a pleasant evening, which may not be worth the bitterness caused by the misalignment in the expected timing of arrival. Lastly, people's intentions are also hard to validate. We often assume that the counterparty has certain intentions because of the way we interpret their words, body language, customs, common sense. However, intentions are very fluid and may change. Most people do not live a disciplined, principle-based life and let circumstances and emotions change the direction of their actions. So, we need to consider intentions in the context of human character and circumstances. Now, let's consider the opinions that get intertwined with the facts. To develop an independent point of view, we need to distinguish between facts and opinions. Since we've evaluated the counterparty's interests and needs, we'll have an easier time flagging the opinions. Some opinions would be more agreeable than others. Some opinions reveal emotional response rather than well-reasoned judgment. If we frequently encounter similar situations or interact with the same people, we can maintain an inventory of these opinions, which provides us with more insight into the other party's current state rather than the situation itself. Still, it is helpful to be cognizant of the other person's level of maturity and emotional state, since most situations involving 2 or more parties require agreement or collaboration. Step 5. Consider our possible response through the viewpoint of our values. Now, let's project the outcome of the situation on our own life and the life of the counterparty. Sometimes we can view us and them as one collective unit when we are connected through more permanent work or personal relationships. So often, if we put aside our personal needs, we would gain trust in synergy, which is attainable only in a collaborative setting. Once we've determined the possible outcome, we need to consider whether it is consistent with our values. For instance, some of my values are integrity, compassion, responsibility, and self-reliance. If the outcome is achieving trust at the expense of integrity, it costs too much. Sometimes the outcome satisfies one value but violates another, and we need to think in a longer term. For instance, if you help out of compassion, but your help attracts people who constantly violate the principle of responsibility and self-reliance, you may need to change the way you help them, the outcome, so that they can get their share of struggles to develop responsibility and self-reliance. One challenge comes when our values misalign with the values of our counterparty. Our decision forces our own values, but if the other party does not embrace them, we'll have a hard time. It does not necessarily mean that it is a dead end. Since most people share certain values, our decision may need to be based on a different moral premise that we have in common with the other side. Understanding how the potential outcomes of the situation align with our values and project in our lives provides us with comfort and the confidence to take full ownership of our decision and response. So, we should have a solid ground for our next decision if we are honest with ourselves how we feel about the situation, evaluate other parties' interests as well as our own, sort out the facts and opinions, and consider the moral implications of our decision. It all sounds very intuitive, but most of our errors and regrets happen because we skip some of these steps when we react to the environment. As such, it only benefits us to focus on a consistent approach to the various situations in our lives.